Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. We're ready to go ahead and get started. All right, so I'd like to introduce to you again, Dr. Gina A. Garcia. Yay! Oh, he's coming. They're ready for you.
Okay, is there people online? How would I?
They're hearing you. You can't have a conversation.
Yeah, but they can take this?
Mhm.
Okay, okay.
They can do that.
All right. Hello again. Why is everybody over here? And a little bit over there. There's going to be conversation, so you're probably going to want a friend because it is a little bit interactive. Usually it's a little even more interactive, but with this setup, I went quickly changed to get feedback because I want to get feedback from y'all. I meant to put a question on there to also ask me questions. We'll do that with the last slide. If y'all wanted to ask me questions. So if you have questions, we'll say that for the last slide. So typically following the conversation that I just had, then I have people think through some of those dimensions and like think through, well, how are we doing? Also, there's a philosophical conversation about, are we ready to do this? So that's where you're going to talk to each other. But I like to, I figure we use the poll situation to see where folks are at, right? So if you have your phone, you will need your phone in order to respond to the polls. And also you might need to do research, like look into your mission statement, right? What does your mission statement say? It gives you a way to like dig in. We're not a mission statement yet, but the first question, yeah, you can scan the QR code or you can text the vote to 762-550-3115. If you're online, same thing. You can scan or text, or the folks online can even use the website, the digitaljoyengage.com, hashtag 26467. So it should be live. So once you get in, you can answer this question. In what ways does your institution project its commitment to being an HSI? And this is really open-ended. And it might be none. That could be a response. It's a response. It might be we have a website. It might be we have a department. We have an HSI project director. We have an HSI manager, right? Like there's so many levels. Campuses do many, many different things. So this is just a quick assessment of where your campus is at. And again, none is the right answer. It is a correct answer. So feel free to do that. That's why it's open-ended. Is it working? I don't see anything yet, but hopefully it is. It says it's playing. Those of you coming in, come on. We will be doing engagement high with polls. So you can use your phone or a laptop if you have a laptop. Has anybody entered and it didn't work? Can you refresh it? Okay, let's see if that works. Maybe, yeah, maybe put pause and then play again. It says it's playing. Okay, thinking, and then you'll have to push play again. Oh, there we go. Nice. You should have to push play again though, because it looks like it's paused. Yeah. Maybe push play. Yeah. I use the mic. You can't take it down, or it's not hooked up. I mean, I don't have to, just so I can walk over there because it's hard to see from here. All right, so now I can walk and see it because it's so big. And as you keep inputting, it'll keep scrolling up. So Sawgrass Diversity Report Assessment, but in my opinion, failed to follow up. Always asking, how does this support our students? Title V projects, participating and hosting events like today. We look for underrepresented STEM students for grant projects. Not sure, that's great. Co-curricular experiences. Nevada Promise, last dollar scholarship, DACA coordinator, Title V grant, Mariachi Plata. I love it. All good stuff. I think I'll comment on the always asking, how does this fill in the blank support our students? I assume, how does this program or curriculum or faculty member, I don't know, fill in the blank, could be anything, support our students. One thing I want to caution you against is, as you're getting into this work and really thinking about HSI, is doing race neutral work. I mentioned that there's research coming out about the really race neutral and or race evasive, meaning we're not in, and it really should be identity, because the H isn't a race. I know that. It's really identity neutral, right? That we're like, we serve all students. People struggle with that at HSIs, I'll be totally honest. So that's one of those moral conversations, ethical conversations, internal conversations. So everything I say, you get to take what you want and leave what you don't, right? Whatever work is going to work for you in your campus, you say, yeah, I like that. That's not going to work on our campus. Okay, that's cool. Then you don't have to take that with you. But identity neutral work is really not equity work. So if you're doing equity work and you want to do equity work, you have to name the group. So if you don't name the group, then it defers to the dominant group, which is white students, just because we're embedded in systems of oppression that favor whiteness. And that's just how it works. So that is one thing I would caution you with that one. Strategic plan indicators, HSI task force, yay, institutional and system. And of course, these are all anonymous, so we don't know here. We don't know which is who. Being here, a task force, good. Those are good things. Okay, so this is your now share time. So if you're sitting next to someone, go ahead and share with your person the things that you said. And if you're at the same institution, that's helpful. So maybe you want to pair up with this person in the same institution. The kind of stuff that I do is institutional analysis. It's one institution at a time. So you're welcome to share, obviously, with folks that are not from your institution, but go ahead and talk to each other. And I honestly, if you have a group of folks, feel free to gather up in a little group, because really what I was going to have you all do is talk through these questions and then put them on some post-it notes on the wall, but we went with this just because of the setup. But if you want to go ahead and have a conversation, start this conversation around what is it? Because sometimes people just don't know. And so sharing with others, like maybe somebody's like, I didn't know it was in our strategic plan. Well, who wrote that, right? Talk to that person. I didn't know we had a DACA coordinator. Cool, talk to that person, right? So go ahead and share for a few minutes. All right, as y'all wrap up that one, I'm going to ask my folks in the booth if you could go to the next one. I wish I could get feedback from y'all, but they told me if I take the mic out there, then it'll feedback. So we'll take this as the feedback. These are for you though. These conversations are for you to take back to your campus anyway. So if you could go to the next one, I'll give you a preview so you can start preparing, is about your mission statement. So one of the ways to project out your commitment to HSI is a website, and let's make sure we push play. A website or a mission. So going to your mission page, or it's often a mission statement and then like some value statements, going there and seeing, is HSI on our radar? Is it something we've committed to publicly in that way? I'll give you a little bit of the research. The research shows that, can you push play? It's not playing, and it should be the same number and everything. But the research shows that 0 institutions commit to being an HSI in their mission statement. Even institutions that have had 5 multi-million-dollar grants, 5. I know campuses that have had 5 $2.5 million grant. So do the math. 5 times 2.5 million. Even those are not willing to say publicly that we're a Hispanic serving institution. We will take the federal government's money because of the students we're enrolling, but we're not willing to actually claim it on our website. And I just say that again, this is the values conversation. What are we willing as an institution, but also grappling with the fact that HSI really is a federal designation. Right. So how much are we willing to commit to that? So most mission statements, the research shows, do not commit to being HSI, and none say that they're committed to serving Latinx students specifically, even campuses with like upwards of 80-90% Latinx students. So that's the hint. Uh-oh. Let's go to the next one. That's the hint, but go ahead and dig through yours. See what yours says. Just reflect on it. Most mission statements are very generic, and they say things like, we commit to diversity. Yay, us. All right. No, and I don't know. Okay, so does your mission statement include a statement about being an HSI and or serving Latinx students? And to give you a reason why I talk about committing to serving Latinx students in your mission statement research says that you should state in your mission statement who you are serving. That's why. So any organization, so no matter what you think about other organizations you're a part of, any organization should commit in the mission statement to who we are actually. It should state somehow how we are serving. It might even be serving the region. It might even say we're serving the Las Vegas region, which is 56%. I'm making this number up. 56% Hispanic people, right? Like it can be that sort of broad in general, right? But this again is an internal conversation that needs to happen. All right, so we got 10 no's and 2 I don't knows. Okay, go ahead and talk about this one. Mission statement. Where are you at? What is your feeling? Should we put it in our mission statement? Or are we like, nah, we good, but maybe we should put it somewhere else? Anybody who is in Zoom land, wherever Zoom land is, feel free to add chats, and we have access to the chat here. We can also hear from y'all. All righty, so we'll go ahead and move to the next one. If my booth folks, I know it takes a few minutes to get to the next one. I'm definitely interested in hearing what y'all have to say, but I'm just told I can't take this microphone out there because I was gonna go out there and just be all like, it'll feed back and we'll all be like, ah. I could make y'all come on stage, but at the end, if anybody has like specific comments, they can, I'll let y'all come up to the stage. By the way, this is just a general read. So even if we're not getting everybody, like if you're having trouble with the poll or, you know, you're not engaging, that's fine. That's why there's conversation and the poll. This just gives the general read of what's going on with folks in the room, right? And in Zoom, because Zoom land can also get it. So here's the HSI task force conversation. If we could, yep, it's refreshing. All right, they got on board with the, so this is the task force, and it might be, I don't know, right? I don't know if anybody's having a bigger conversation. Remember I talked about that this work is often done in little tiny pockets. So like one person or a group, the HSI director often is doing the work, but maybe a campus-wide effort needs to get going, right? And that's a philosophical conversation about, is that what our campus is ready for? Are we ready to engage in that level of conversation? I was talking to someone at lunch and we were talking about the HBCU right comment. And I had never said this before, but I thought, oh yeah, that's exactly that HBCUs were not originally committed to Black liberation. All right. So historically, HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, were actually created as a way to keep Black people out of white institutions, right? And they were that way for all the way up until segregation was outlawed. So over 50 years, right? Over more than a half of a century, right? More than a half a century, probably about 70 years, I guess 60 technically, from the Moral Act number 2, which is when it really solidified the separate but equal. So HSIs are in that same sort of early space. And so what I said to the person I was talking to was like, if we compared it, we'd be like in the 1920s right now. If we compared it, HSIs are that early in our work. We are not anywhere near being in that space of liberation yet, where we're like, we fully commit to that. The other thing with HBCUs in comparison is they are spaces for right? Anybody that commits to going to HBCU, they are good spaces for anyone that goes there. And so how do we get to that place, right? That structural change. So I just wanted to add that because I don't want this to feel like, oh, we're not doing that, right? But like we are so early in this HSI work. It's early. You just came into what I call the social movement. HSI is a social movement right now. Social movements change organizations. So the little tiny group in here that is here, y'all are now part of the little tiny movement that's getting bigger. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's okay. And social movements change organizations. So all good, no matter what this is, it's not a criticism. It's all right, where are we at and where do we want to go, right? So does your campus have an HSI task force? No, and I don't know. Somebody on one of the slides said their campus did have one. So, but then I don't know what happened to that person or if they weren't able to vote yes. But on the first slide, it did say it's not refreshing. Yeah, that's what we're hearing. Okay, well, bummer. Oh yeah, because there's only 3 there. Could you hit refresh and see if it comes up? Apparently we don't have good internet in this room. We don't have good internet. We can't use microphones out there. Which is hard for accessibility, right? Because then we can't get any feedback from the audience. Because if y'all talk, we need you to be able to use the microphone. So, oh, there we go. Okay. So we do have a yes. So I would assume that's maybe 6 people at one campus, because I know y'all are, coming from different campuses, or maybe there's a couple campuses, but there is some no's and some I don't knows. Again, what are we willing to move towards that sort of space in this work? All right, next on the poll. So I usually start with sort of a big overview general, and there's more questions I have people grapple with on their campus and fill in like this document. We do like an assessment of servingness. But the next one, when we go to the next one, I think it starts getting into curriculum a little bit. So I used to ask people, where on campus does curriculum center Latinx students? And of course, all the usual suspects came up. The usual suspects: ethnic studies, Latino studies, gender and women's studies. What else would come up? Ethnic studies broadly, random things like psychology, and it would be campus by campus, like, oh, well, our social workers, they're doing that great work, right? Be little pockets of servingness in the curriculum. And so then I was like, well, where is it not happening? So one of the things I talk about inclusion is funny. I don't love the idea of inclusion. I mean, I want us all to be included, but when we say, oh, we include everybody, we actually don't acknowledge that we are not including everybody. So the opposite question is, who are we excluding? Who doesn't enter the space? Who doesn't come into the room? Who doesn't engage in the thing, right? That's a different way to look at inclusion. So it's the same question. So there's two questions here, if we can get there. I know they're having trouble up there with the internet, but one question is the curriculum. Where do we see the, as I call throughout my work, centering of Latina students? And then where don't we? And so the where don't we is not a call out, it's a call in. Call in our colleagues that are in, I always pick on STEM, chemistry, math, whatever it may be, and say, how do we start to engage with those folks in this work? Now, the interesting thing about Title V and Title III work is a lot of it is STEM based. So some of this work is going on in STEM. So sometimes there is like the one, like chemistry comes up on the side that it is doing it because they've had a couple grants and they're doing this work. So that comes up as well. But since we're having trouble as we wait for them to refresh it, if y'all want to have conversations first and come up with the answers, and then we'll see what it is. Like, where is this work already happening? Because typically these are pockets of servingness. We are already doing servingness in some pockets, but we also need to do a lot better in other pockets. If you could go one more to the next one. All right, so after you talk to your friends, which curricular spaces center Latinx students and other students of color? This is curricular spaces, not co-curricular, not student services. That's a different question. What we do in the curriculum is different than what we do outside. If y'all in the booth could push play, it's not live. I know you might have to then get out and yeah, but It's not live. All right, so after you have your paired conversations, you can also enter the poll. All right, this one looks live, so you can start to answer your questions here. Can you refresh it one more time just to make sure? I see folks entering. Thank you. All righty, here. Yep, curricular spaces. All right, so we got diversity and international students in our offices. So I did say that maybe a co-curricular space, maybe y'all are offering curriculum there. So I don't know. I don't know what that space does, but something to think about is like, so when I say curriculum, I mean the part of the campus that your faculty, your full-time faculty oversee. So the courses that students have to take to get the degree. Now, the interesting thing about curriculum, like general ed courses and their major courses, is students have to take those. They can avoid every other space on campus. Maybe financial aid might be one they usually have to go, maybe admissions and records, maybe advising, but they can avoid cultural centers, they can avoid TRIO programs, they can avoid EOP, they can avoid Center for Students with Disabilities. I mean, they can so avoid all the spaces depending on what they have going on in their lives. But curriculum, you got to get through the curriculum in order to graduate, right? So to engage faculty in these conversations is a pretty important part of the HSI journey. And that, I think, is where we need faculty to get on board, right? That's where it's great when we have like provosts here, right, that are thinking about this and engaging in this work, then we get faculty on the side. So it can't be one-sided. We can't expect our student affairs or student services side of the house to do all the servingness work, right? Student affairs and student services are often the side of the house that has historically created spaces of diversity and inclusion and belonging for our students. We want to also bring that into the curriculum, right? So how do we start to bring that into the curricular side of the house? That's where we really are starting to like, oh, we got some work to do. Like she's calling for a long-term change. Yeah. Remember I told you about the provost that said, Gen Ed, we want it in Gen Ed. We want what Gina's talking about in the Gen Ed curriculum. If we're going to hit all students and it's going to be liberatory ed, it's got to be in the Gen Ed, right? And so they're working, and that's going to take like 2 years before it actually gets through all the processes and governance. By the way, I wrote an article about faculty governance structures shutting down some of these things. So even when we get going, we get going, governance structures sometimes shut it down. So if you serve on faculty governance boards, you got a role, right? You got a role to play in making sure that you are in those spaces pushing the charge, because curriculum can get shut down at the faculty governance space. So that is what we wrote about in this article, that there were faculty who were not approving of different curricular changes that were being proposed that would be good for the example we give is about heritage Spanish courses and offering heritage Spanish courses for heritage Spanish speakers in a way that would allow them to get credit in a different way than they had been getting. And non-Spanish departments didn't like it, and they had a lot of power in the faculty governance space, and they shut it down because they felt like it was a threat on their department. So those things come up. Politics, I don't gotta tell y'all, politics is wild in higher ed. So you're moving, you're like, yeah, we're doing this. We wrote up the whole curriculum, we're proposing this new thing, and then it gets shut down. At that point, I'll tell you another story about a mission statement. I have a campus I'm working with. They were going. They were working on a mission statement. They were also working on changing their name because their name was named after a Spanish colonizer. And they felt like that was not appropriate for their mission of being equity and justice focused. And the community shut that one down. The community and alumni were like, we're not changing the name. And so the mission slowed down as well. The mission group has also been going at it for like a year. And they said, hold up on changing the mission. Because if we've gotten pushback on the name change, we're probably going to get pushback on the mission. And the trustees were on board in that case. The trustees were like, yeah, let's go. And the community and alumni came for the trustees. That's what happens when you do justice work. So know that that's part of being in a social movement, that people are going to come for you. And so got lots of examples because I get to work with campuses all the time and we're like, yeah, we're going. And at some point there's resistance. Somebody is going to resist, right? So how do we prepare for that resistance? How do we respond to that resistance, right? Because even when we got folks like trustees on board and then they get attacked, it gets a lot. It starts to become a huge, interesting conversation about how much we're going to commit to HSI or not. So let's have maybe one more, maybe like skip the next couple. But I want to also give people the opportunity to ask questions because I haven't gotten any feedback, and that's not normal when I give a talk. But it's going to require you to come on stage and ask the question because the microphone can't go down there. So if you are willing, or if you can convince the friend next to you to come up and ask the question, or Aisha. But I want to make sure I have the feedback loop because I haven't heard from y'all. And I know folks have questions. And we have about 20 minutes. So I want to make sure that I open that up as well. Some feedback loop, any responses to anything we've been doing or anything I said earlier before lunch. So I'm going to open it up for that. Okay. The phone number is 775-725. She forgot her number. 300-4123. Everybody blow her up. 725. You can text a question or you can come up. Yeah, feel free to come up. But you got to come like literally all the way up. Yes, of course.
Okay. All right. A pleasure to meet you and an honor. My name is Juana Reynosa Gomez from Truckee Meadows Community College. And my question is, what advice or suggestions do you have for someone to, like myself, which I'm not in senior administration, but I would like to have the conversation to get HSI on our mission statement? Like, how do we propose that so that without being too much of a disruptor, how do we get the ball rolling here?
Yeah, that's a great question. Are you going to take a picture up here? Okay, we got to pause for a picture. That's a great question. So part of it is, and the answer is different for every campus, right? Because y'all are from different campuses. So there's that every campus is going to have a different process. The campuses I've worked with that focus on mission tended to be small. So if you're at a big campus, I'm like, I don't know if I have a good answer. Because that's like such a big process, right? Now, the campuses I have worked out with Mission, it has actually 2 campuses that I've worked at. They said they had to wait for the mission to come up in cycle, that there's actually a cycle where we review our mission statement. I don't know if you know this or not, but I didn't know this either until I worked with several campuses and we're like, we're the cycle's coming up to review the mission now. And so now we're bringing it up into the conversation, right? And that's what was happening with this campus that was like really moving fast forward, and then the name change thing got really ugly. So there's that there are different cycles. So figuring out the processes on your campus. The other thing that I would say is there are often folks on campus that are doing this work like your HS. So a couple campuses that have started to do that, their HSI directors started to push the issue up. Right. They started to push up to the president's office and be like, can we get a mission change? Can we review the mission? It's coming from the task force. Another reason why the task force. Other thing I would say about the task force, the ones that are really powerful and that do something they come from provosts or presidents. So the president doesn't pick the people. We know that. Yeah. But somebody picked all the people, decided who was going to do it, wrote the email, and then the president pushed send, right? And so the invitation from the task force actually comes from the president. That's another really effective strategy, right? So thinking about how you're going to strategize. Again, going back to the idea that this is a social movement. Anybody that's been an organizer, has anybody been an organizer? If you've been an organizer, use organizing tactics. This is organizing tactics work. That's why I call it a social movement, because it's figuring out, well, what are the structures? What is the strategy? So with organizing, one of the strategies is waiting for your time. There's an opening. There's an opening in time where you can insert your agenda. And so you have to sort of wait for that opening, right? And be like, when's the opening coming? And strategize for that opening, right? And know that this is the time when we're going to do it. So there's that, strategizing on when the best time to bring this conversation up. But oftentimes those task force, and I'm really encouraging to think about those task force, those are the folks that are pushing the mission conversation. Right. But if you're going to go back to your campus and say, we really need to think about an HSI task force, start to get higher level folks on board with it so that they'll be the ones that send the invitation. Right. That like it comes like, ooh, because think about it. When you get an invitation from like a provost or your dean, your provost, your president to be on a committee, you kind of say yes. Right. You're like, oh, I guess I got it. Right. Like it's coming from like somebody at high level. And so there's that commitment, and it feels like that too when it's somebody at that level. So thinking about that of like, where is this work starting? That's the social movement. And where are we getting who are we working towards to change their mindset? This is mindset stuff. How are we going to change mindset? Was there a question? Let me back up because I feel like I'm going to feed. Should an institution have diversity statement or a separate EDI statement from your mission statement? I mean, that's debatable. I do see some folks doing DEI with HSI work and some that it's very separate. And I think that's interesting. Again, philosophical conversation, y'all. Every campus is different. What is going to work on your campus? So I think the concern is that when DEI is over there and HSI over there, it creates a like zero sums game. It's like DEI is fighting for its stuff and HSI is fighting for its stuff. And if you're an Anapese is fighting for its stuff, right? So now folks are fighting for things, and we're folks of color and minoritized folks fighting for things, which is problematic, which is a reflection of white supremacy culture. So we don't want to create those sort of divisions, right? But again, it has to be that conversation. It's like, are we ready to put it? And I don't know, I go back and forth of like, should HSI and Anapese and MSI fall under DEI, or does it go the other way? I'm not really sure. And there's not a good answer yet. And I think these are still having conversations, or can they exist separately? There are campuses, like I said, that have HSI directors. Probably the most prominent person on any campus is the vice provost of HSI initiatives, which is at the University of Arizona. That's the only place that I know there is a vice provost. So vice provost meaning reporting at the provost cabinet, right? And reporting up to the provost. So vice provost of HSI initiative, that's a really powerful position. And that's at University of Arizona. And they are doing phenomenal work. They are pushing like you wouldn't believe at very like fast rates. They're changing a lot at University of Arizona because they have someone at a vice provost level who thinks about HSI every single day. Every single day. It's their job, right? So thinking about, are we ready to commit a person? Other campuses are doing HSI directors. So UCLA and UC Davis and UC Santa Cruz have HSI directors. Much lower down, they're not anywhere near cabinet. Cabinet has power, right? But they are designated HSI people who are moving the conversation every single day. Like that's their job, to move the conversation. HSI directors are different than HSI grant directors, by the way. So if someone gets a grant and they're a grant director, that's different than the HSI director. HSI director comes from a different funding source, whereas the HSI grant director is grant funded for the 5 years of the grant. So there's lots of different models of how we want to move forward in this work. And there's no one right way. It really is just a matter of what is our best approach for our campus. So that's my response to that. Is there one more? Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that I have a good answer. I don't know that there's good HSI specific programs, but there are good, I think, community programs, engagement programs, right? What I'll talk about with community engagement is civic engagement is a value of colleges and universities in general, right? A lot of colleges and universities value civic engagement. That's not something new. That's not an HSI only concept. What I caution you from is going back to the identity neutral stuff. So civic engagement, I've done some of my own work in civic engagement. The measures of civic engagement are measured on dominant identities. So, and that's the reality of a lot of our measures of a lot of things. They're normed on dominant identities. I'll give you a really good example, easy example. Civic engagement, one measure of civic engagement is asking students whether or not they vote. Did you vote? If yes, you're civically engaged. If no, not civically engaged. It eliminates the folks that don't vote because they can't, which is undocumented students and other students who just don't vote. Those same students might be very engaged in political engagement, right? So undocumented students, for example, there's articles written about undocumented students being very politically active, not having a vote, but being very politically active and social movement. We're talking about social movements, leading entire movements to support undocumented students and DACA students. So to say that our only measure of engagement is this one measure of whether or not people vote is not being critical of the measure, right? So what's the measure? And so that's what I would respond to that is like, there are campus organizations already doing some of this work. I keep saying that servingness is not happening. There are things happening, but what we want to start to do is, are we engaging students? Are our students engaged in that? Like maybe you have a civic engagement program, or maybe you have a service learning program. The assessment, the level of assessment would be, are Latina students engaged in that? Because maybe they're not. Right? Maybe they're not actually engaging in that, but it doesn't mean they're not doing service learning. It doesn't mean they're not doing civic engagement. They're just not doing it through the formal program we have. Right? So assessing who's actually accessing that program is a big deal. So back to the civic engagement question of like good examples. I think people are starting to use their HSI grants to do some of this work, particularly as we talk about this being a good liberatory measure that you can actually put it into your grants, right? So that's what I would encourage you to think through. Now, HSI grants have historically been written very normatively. They just copy what has been done before. And what has been done before? Tutoring centers, mentoring programs, STEM, SI, supplemental instruction, right? Like just the usual, back to the usual suspects. Usual suspects. People are starting to be much more savvy and thinking, okay, well, Gina says civic engagement could be in there. So how do we wrap that up into our? Now, the cool thing about HSI grants, as y'all are starting to think about your HSI grants, your Title V, Title IIIs, NSF has HSI grants, is they are open. There's not the same limitations of like a TRIO, if anybody's ever run a TRIO program, or like an EOP. Those are very stringent. You have to respond to the grant in very stringent ways. The Title V and Title III grants allow you to freedom dream. But freedom dream, right? Be brave and go ahead and jump into that freedom dreaming. The good thing is that we now have research to back up your freedom dreaming, right? My own research and many others is saying this is what HSI is. So you can write up your entire HSI grant on the Serving-ness framework. Serving-ness framework is an empirical article that has a framework, right? You can draw on that and say, we're using the Serving-ness framework, right? And it's been normed based on HSIs. It's been normed on HSIs, not on dominant groups like Tinto. Haven't jabbed at Tinto yet. Tinto. Talking about how we've normed higher education, right? Tinto, I think most of us have realized, like that's probably not the best measure for any minoritized group to think about how students should integrate into a campus and completely disconnect from everything they've ever done, right? But ironically, I've seen Tinto used in HSI grants only in the last couple of years, right? That people are still using because it's a framework. It gives you a framework to think about integration of students. So rethinking those, right, and challenging those and starting to use now our HSI frameworks are giving you a framework to use in your HSI grant work. I feel like I never actually answer the question, but I say a lot of other things. Did y'all notice that? We got a question, yay. Wait, when we're here.
Buenas tardes. ¿Cómo está usted? No. I have a question, particularly this term Hispanic, like you could be Hispanic in a sense. Yeah, anyway, like the term Hispanic comes from the census, right, in the 1970s, and how this could be limiting for other types of Latinos, and the ways in which Latinx isn't a term people use outside of the academy, and just the ways that might be a limiting features, sort of the language games at work. You said how historically Black colleges are in universities, right? Like that was they were designated as such as a way to sort of go along with white supremacy. So yeah, just like HSI and all this sort of like Latin A, like how that might become yeah, pretty limiting in how people self-identify and do this kind of work. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Did you want to take a picture too? No, just kidding. You don't have to. Who's taking our picture? Oh, you had someone come up. I forgot what the question was. No, just kidding. I didn't. That was kind of a statement, but I'll just retweet it. Hispanic is limiting. If y'all have noticed, I've used Hispanic, Latino, Latina, Latine, Latinx. I might have said Chicana. I don't know. Chicanx. I very fluidly move through language because it is fluid. Language is fluid. If we get caught up in Hispanic versus Latine, Latinx, we can't move forward because we're caught up in a term that's fluid, right? And so I think that's a cool conversation to have with your students, right? So campuses will engage students in that conversation because the reality is your students have their opinions too. I went to one campus recently, and it was in California. I like to think California is progressive. It was a community college in California. The students were all calling themselves Hispanic. So we can't assume that they are using a term that's not Hispanic. Because I was like, oh, y'all are all calling yourselves Hispanic. Wow, this is cool and crazy and wild, right? Like I was like, what? It kind of blew my mind, right? I thought the Pew Hispanic or the polls show us that younger generations are more likely to use Latino, Latine, not Latinx necessarily unless you're in college. But they were actually using Hispanic, and they were, first year students. So I think it's an important conversation to allow our students to talk about this. I think about it as fluid and therefore, and also a very personal thing, right? So you can allow people to identify all of us in the same room. If we all identify under the H, we can all claim ourselves differently. That's okay, right? It's not a bad thing for each of us to have a different title while understanding that Hispanic Servant Institution is a federal designation, and therefore that's why it's Hispanic, because federal designation, the federal government is what calls us Hispanic, right? So until we change what the census calls us, and if you haven't read Christina Mora's book called Making Hispanics, that's a good book to read because she lays out why it's Hispanic. And she says wild things like they tested things like what did they test? They test Latin America, no, South America, and people thought it was like the South of the US, right? Like things like that like people didn't actually know. And these are people who are checking the H box, right? Thinking that South America was like, the southern part of the United States, right? That's a very limited view of the Americas, right? Because this is the Americas, right? We're on the Americas, Turtle Island to be specific, right? And the indigenous way to think about the land that we are on. So yes, terminology is important, although I don't want us to get caught up in it because it'll prevent us from doing the work, right? So let's have the conversations. It's a great program to have with students. Have it every single year. Have students engage in the conversation, and they might change from their first year to their fourth year, final year when they graduate, how they themselves identify. That's called critical consciousness. It's called racial identity development. It's a liberatory outcome to allow students to engage in identity work, right? So I'm all for us engaging in that work and not projecting it onto the students. Okay. Yeah, that's a good one. People, yes, the MSI versus HSI question. Should we be an MSI or should we be an HSI or should we be an HSI/MSI? I'll go to the technical definition. If you are federally designated HSI and if you are getting Title V or Title III dollars or even NSF dollars for their, NSF has a huge pot of money, HSI money. So if you're getting any of those pots of money, then you're an HSI, right? Like you got those programs. And so it again goes back to the philosophical question. The MSI designation doesn't have the same pot of money. When you tell students that HSI is connected to money, they want to know where the money's going. So remember I said like you're going to start going, you're going to start making progress. You're like, yeah, we're an HSI, and then you bring students in and they have their critical conversation about what they want to call themselves, and we come to an agreement that we're all going to call ourselves different things, and we're going to keep being cool and united, and we move forward. Then we hit a barrier of like students are like demanding like, where's this money, right? Where's this HSI thing, right? Like you're getting money because of us, right? It's a philosophical question y'all need to have, right? That there is money attached to this and that feels tokenizing to people. When you know that you checked the box that helped the institution get to HSI, that helped the institution get federal dollars, millions of dollars. HSI dollars is millions of dollars. It's not a little tiny drop of money. It's millions of dollars. That feels tokenizing to people. And you're like, but we're going to be all like, MSI everybody stuff, right? Philosophical conversation. You need to have these conversations. If you're an MSI, cool. You could be MSI/MSI. And a PZ also attached to one large, really complicated group. Even more complicated than the H is the PETA group, and also has monies attached to it if you go after those monies. So these are the things that will come up in conversation around how people are going to feel when they feel like they're being used and or tokenized in order to get more money from the federal government. Because there is pots of money and it's competitive money and people are actively going for it, but cautiously going after it. That feels weird and it doesn't feel good to people. Any more before we wrap up? One thing faculty can do to best benefit our students, get on hiring committees and speak up about what we're going to value in our job statement and what we're going to value when we evaluate candidates, because we should be valuing people who can teach and engage students of color, because that's who's coming into HSI. So if they can teach and engage students of color and engage in community engaged research with those students, that's a good value versus where they got their degree. Because those are the things we value in higher ed. We're like, they got good pedigree, but this person over here actually knows how to teach and engage communities of color. That's a really important conversation. So get into those meetings and disrupt. That's what you should do. If you're a faculty member listening right now, get into the meetings and disrupt. We need faculty to be more disruptive on these things. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate y'all.